unknown participant is now joining.
Unknown participant, okay. Hey, good evening, everyone. Council, welcome to our special council meeting. I've got 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so let's get started. This will be strictly talking about finances, the budget, capital projects, et cetera. I think we're going to look back a little bit at 2020 and also take a look at where we're going. It's almost time to start the budget process for 2022. So Todd Bertrand, would you kick it off, please? First of all, let's see, do we need to, clerk treasurer need to take our roll? So I guess we need to have that record. Ms. Clerk Treasurer, would you take the roll, please?
Are we, for the council, is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay, Troy Patton,
Here.
Joe Edwards,
Here.
Scott Fry,
Here.
Mike John,
Here.
Cindy Spalteric,
Here.
Jake Gilbert,
Here.
Scott Willis.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Very good. Thank you. Todd Bertrand?
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Tonight's purpose is to, as the opening slide represents, it's the financial strategy, and we will walk you through the various components. We are now winding up Q1 of 2021, and as previously mentioned, tonight's workshop is just information sharing only. There'll be no decisions set before you to take. I would welcome a conversation, a dialogue rather than a monologue. With me tonight is Greg Eritaz of Financial Services Group. He is as you well know, he's been the financial advisor from the budgetary side of the city for now some 10 years. And much of this work product that you will see tonight is projects that have been identified that are either active or in the pipeline to be active that have yet to be brought to you for consideration. And much of this is predicated upon the sustainability plan that you have had and is constantly updated. So as an overview, the areas that we would like to discuss tonight are represented on the screen. I won't go through every one of those, but everything from revenue and spending, debt, what we have in the future, not dissimilar from the GEO bond discussion that we had multiple times last year, and our property tax rate and stabilization will give you a historical view, and then the most efficient way of using capital. And there will be some recommendations that Mr. Eritaz is submitting to you tonight. Property tax levy in this next screen is really just a, and Greg's going to help me co-present tonight as well. But this is a historical view over the last, beginning in 2010, of what our property tax levy is. Now there's several different revenue streams that come to the city, property tax being one of them, local income tax being another. Those are the two primary cornerstones of our revenue. We do get commercial vehicle excise tax, riverboat tax, cigarette tax. All those are de minimis in scale when you hold those up against property taxes and local income tax. Now you'll see two lines there, total property tax and max levy. I will have Mr. Eritaz describe the difference between those two lines and how they correlate.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd, and good evening. So the total property taxes, if you look at the 1782 and you would look at CCD, general fund, and our bond funds, that is what makes up the line total property tax levy. So if you look at the 1782, the back part of it, it's all the different funds that are providing for property taxes to the city. The maximum levy, which is the blue line, that is the levy as defined right there. The maximum levy defined as the normal growth quotient plus our special legislation, as you know, that we put together many years ago. And that trends up as long as we are over a certain growth amount. And that's been working positively for us. Last year, we just made it. We just made it. And so it's based upon over the 3-year average. And so that growth gives us a little extra bump and allows us to match the revenues and expenses between what we're levying in the max levy and what we're AV growth and what services we have to provide. So it's a simultaneous equation going on. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah. Just looking for a laser pointer. So any questions about that? About these two components as it relates to our property tax levy and ultimate revenue?
One question. So what you're saying is the bottom line is what we can expect to collect. The top line is what we should have got, really.
No, that's not true. And do I have to stand in front of the mic?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's what I thought. No, that's not true. So what I'm saying is the blue line is the maximum levy. The red line includes the debt funds and that. So your total levied property taxes are the red line. The maximum levy for operation purposes and CCD is the blue line. So there's a separation, and our blue line here in Westfield would not be comparable to a Plainfield, to a Zionsville, or anything like that, because our blue line is structured with our extra growth quotient. Okay? So no, this is not property taxes levied and then actually collected. This is the difference between including all of our debt funds and then our actual maximum levy.
So what you're saying is in Plainfield, those lines would be closer together then. Is that right?
Actually, no, that might not be true. Actually, in some cases, the red line could, in some cities or towns, it's quite a bit. What I'm saying is that the blue line would not have the same growth here as it would in Plainfield, because we're able to match and they don't have as strong a growth.
So to give further context to that, part of the constraints by way of state regulation and property tax caps, each year we're issued a statewide growth quotient. So that could range from 2% to 3%. So even if, thank you, sir, even if a community has negative growth or AAV has dropped, they still can increase their budget by whatever the state growth quotient is. That doesn't always work for a growing community such as Westfield. Many of the communities across Indiana are either stagnant, or flat, or they are losing assessed valuation. And so, as Greg mentioned, we pursued a special legislation 2010, maybe 11.
Yeah, it's been a while.
That allows us to capture, if our growth in the AV is, say, 12%, which historically it has been over the last several years, we can capture more than the statewide growth quotient, up to 9%. So if you think in terms of research and development and sales, marketing, the product folks are doing their job, the sales folks are doing their job, and you're being able to take advantage of that margin of increased sales is perhaps a good way to put that. Any questions on this slide before we move on? I think these are fundamental because as we move into the preparation and the construction of the 2022 budget, I'm looking at members of the Finance Committee to get intimately involved in that process, and perhaps even more so than what we did last year, in laying the foundation of where we ended and where we're headed.
And Todd, I think a good point, Mayor's always brought this up, is we've got to be able to unlock the revenues or the growth and stay up with it. And that's what we did back when we sought the special legislation. And then also by combining it with a debt levy, we're able to unlock and match basically the growth and ultimately remember, there's been one directive from the mayor is keep the tax rate stable. Okay, and that's been the goal, and these are the tools that we can use to get there.
Okay, so next slide shows exactly that. Go ahead.
I got a quick question. So you said last year we just barely reached our goal. What year do you guys project where the growth is going to slow down to the point that we might not be able to capture that extra?
I have not done that analysis at this point in time, but I'm not sure in the foreseeable 3 to 5 year window, we're seeing that happening, but, you know, I have to work with the team here, and we meet with the other department heads and do your fiscal plans. I guess it will be the year you stop approving fiscal plans, okay, and annexation. It'll be shortly thereafter. And remember, that slide was the basis then for lit distribution, some other things we're going to go through. So if council would say, we're not growing anymore, we're not annexing, no more new houses, it'll be that year or the year after.
So as you see on this particular slide, the historical and forecasted tax rate, actual property tax rate, is the red line, make sure is this line. As you can see, it takes us to 2021, and then as we forecast out, we're anticipating keeping it flat at just under 80 cents a hundred. So that's a historical view of the tax rate performance. Local income tax. You can see from 2019, percentage-wise in raw dollars, it was this year in 2020 that, and beyond, the calculation formula was changed, wherein what was formerly COIT, they relabeled everything in the nomenclature as local income tax. Previous to this legislation that moved through the General Assembly last year, the local income tax distribution was predicated largely on debt. And to put it simply, folks that lived in unincorporated or smaller towns in the county, a chunk of their income tax was going to fund debt instruments primarily in Carmel. They took the lion's share of the COIT. We were party to this, but we were not the lead unit of government in redrafting that legislation. It was the city of Fishers, and you can see how that has then yielded in not only 20, but in 21, keeping those local income tax dollars here. One thing that is not represented on the screen, but it was a change, is the public safety lit. If you recall, we were paying for dispatch services out of our operational budget. And so there was we would argue it was an element of double taxation. Not only did you pay a township tax and a county tax and a city tax, they took all those off the table and designated a few pennies of the local income tax, I think it was 0.25%, my memory serves me correctly, to fund 911 operations. And so we no longer have that represent our operational budget. We actually lowered the budget. And that pays not only for dispatch services, but also pays for technology equipment, in-car computers, radios, things like that historically we paid for out of operations.
Is that agreement still holding firm, Todd?
Yes, sir. It's now, it's part of the funding formula for 911. So we're out of it.
I think, again, I'd like to, yeah, I mean, at the direction of the mayor, we've gone down. Mayor, you and I have been downtown Indianapolis in the Capitol building at least way too many times, protecting the city of Westfield's lit, okay? I even testified on one bill, you know, if you recall, on one bill down there that was going to harm our lit being the city of Westfield's lit. We had meetings after meetings after meetings, and kind of told everybody, you know, kind of leave us out. We're growing, we've got needs, don't take our money. If you've got a dispute among others, you know, settle that. But the mayor, at the mayor's direction, you know, the people that lobbied down there, and I've been down there, and we work every year to keep the city of Westfield's portion. Everybody wants your money. There's no doubt about it.
So local income tax is a good chunk of our overall operating budget. And was conceived many years ago in the legislature as a property tax offset. So it's just representing to you what those numbers are. And then there's a correlation between the LIT, local income tax, that's the other portion of that slide. And we'll post this, distribute to you and post it on the website once we're done tonight. That just gives you a breakout of how it's allocated, and then there's a correlation of local option income tax, or LIT, relative to property tax levies. And it is not an intuitive subject matter. It's not, and I'll let Greg describe how that formula and that corollary works between what's deducted out of your paycheck and how our paychecks, and how it relates to assessed valuation in real property.
So it actually, it's back to, one of the counselors asked about it, and it's back to this one right here in the blue line. So the blue line, the proportion of levy that you get, your maximum levy, is utilized for your proportion that you levy in 21 will drive the lit actual distributions in 2022, regardless of what the pot is. So what I mean by that is, if the pot's 100 million, the individual levies, max levies of each, will drive in the following year the distribution of 100 million. If the 100 million goes to 105 million, still the same numbers are used on the 105, and so that's the way we've been able to keep the nice smooth uptick through that blue line, that very, very important blue line, which drives that, and the overall point of Hamilton County's total pot growing, okay? Now, the first question I even ask myself is, well, wait a minute, what's happening in 2022? If you remember, in the last version, and I've got a new version of the sustainability I'm error checking right now, our staff is, that we projected a slight downtick in 2022. I think we had originally told you 20, we went to 10. I'm not thinking we're going to have any. And why am I thinking that? We're keeping an eye on the withholdings, okay, some of the withholdings information. And in fact, there could be, we could have I tell you every April or May that the Indiana Board of Finance sits down and looks at the trust accounts. Remember, there's over 92 trust accounts. There's a trust account for each county. And then those trust accounts are divided down by the different, even though it's lit, they still use some of the old numbers, the old formulas to drive it. And so we they're going to individually look at those accounts, all of those trust accounts, and if there's excess as defined by the statute, which is over 90 days, then they'll give a special distribution, even if your distribution's going down to 2022. I was trying to propose a bill they ought to average it over the 3 years for the COVID impact, because there's going to be a lot of counties not fortunate as you. Okay, and I think what we're going to have here is we may receive a little extra from that trust account reconciliation, and then I don't think at this point in time we're going to keep the income tax probably at a level. It's not, we feel pretty good that it's not going to go down, but we still want to say but we will not know. Remember, this was addressed last year during budget. We won't know the final numbers until August or September, because that's the process, okay? And so that's the process we deal with. So we're going to say, we always have told the mayor that we, propose the budget in a conservative manner and prepared for things that may happen one way or the other, but then we also try and be, right on as we kind of look forward. Especially after August, we'll be able to refine all the numbers. So that's what you'll see in the up and coming sustainability, and I think some of the latest and greatest news out there is, I think we're going to weather this COVID storm here in Hamilton County quite well, I think.
So are there any questions related to levy, AV, and property, and the local income tax?
Are we gonna get some of this paper?
Yes, after tonight, we'll email it to you all, and then we'll post it on the city's website as well. This is just, once again, this is a forecast, but here we are in, make sure I don't look at that. This is actual, and this is forecasted. And you can see as it's trended over the last decade, it held flat. Much of that, this is impacted, as you know, by the recession, that government units follow it down and follow it back up. And then we begin to do an escalation there.
And so the important point here, Todd, is that I believe one of the council members asked me, when will that cease to exist? And I said, when we quit annexing and we quit building homes. I guess also, I like to point out that when I sit down and go to rating agencies and everything, they look at the amenities that the unit of government has, because that's an attraction. And so I think when certain amenities run out or grow old or whatever, or people don't have those amenities, then you can't put as much faith in the growing assessed valuation, because the sheer fact of the matter is people can find elsewhere to move. And so crime, also a big, keeping up public safety, both police and fire. If you start tilting back some of that, I'm going to say my projections are going to, they don't keep the same growth that we show. And this really drives the ability for us to unlock the growth, as the mayor says, and be able to maintain that tax rate.
So this slide, and we can spend some time on this if you would like. So we kind of set this up in a Gantt chart form. Here are, I'll kind of expand that because it's even difficult for me to read. These are forecasted. So these are not actuals. These are not commitments. These are to give you a look ahead. But these are actuals. So you can see where one has fallen off and how those are laid out from a sequencing standpoint. So we've arrived at income. We've walked our way through income and that history, and now we're moving ourselves through the debt and expense side. What this doesn't take into consideration is operational expenses, and we're going to talk about those. But we spent a considerable amount of time last year discussing how best to deal with the capital needs, and I'll call them short-term capital needs: police cars, fire trucks, dump trucks, certain road projects, keeping the tax rate stable, unlocking the value of the assessed valuation that has, as you saw, continues to increase, and then using these instruments in short-term mechanisms to fund those particular things. I'll drop down to this area. So here we're trying to look into the crystal ball, and when we say PSB, that's the fire station. So I've mentioned that in past discussions. As you know, the current public safety building was built and occupied in 1997. That debt retired at the end of last year. And so we're going through the process now of what would a new fire station cost being built on Osborne, what is Osborne Park out on Ditch Road. This is then contemplating trying to capture the expense related to renovating the current public safety building and converting it completely to the police department. So this has been modeled at 7.6 million, and this has been modeled, I believe, at 6.2 million. And these are the typical $5 million tranches that we deliberated over last year. So I'll pause right here and open the floor for questions or clarity.
Well, Todd, if I may.
Sure.
I think there again is another important point to this slide, and since our team has put them together, I like to say this is something that we work with John's department of John, and quite a bit on all of these. And you'll notice that, number one, they're not 20-year bonds, okay? Number two, they were structured directly in those sequences or those time periods. Number one, to keep them short. Number two, to stay within the life of the assets that we've got, the bucket of assets that we're doing. Number three, to correlate coming on and coming off, because I've done this for 25 years in many, many different places. If you go everything out to 20 years, you're way out there. And you can't take advantage. This, again, to me, is one of the unique things to Westfield. And a growing county. I do it in Hancock County. Got some coming off, some coming on. They've been constant over 10, 20 years, and it's worked very, very well. So we work sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes 5 years, sometimes we have to arm wrestle to get to the right number. And so John usually wins. He's been working out too much. And so we usually work that back and forth and be very, very cognizant of when it's going to come on, how it's going to come on. And so a lease does come on differently than a GO, because you cannot start the former school member knows you can't start the lease rental payment unless you're in the building, unless you do some other things. And so we're very, very constant about, or vigilant about, how we put it on and when we pay it off.
I have a question for you. What's our optimum debt level as a percent of our revenues that we bring in?
I have not calculated that, sir. Not at this point.
What was our optimum debt level 5 years ago as a percent of our revenues?
Well, we've got a slide here that we showed the tax rate for the debt. And I think that's the way we'd like to look at it. Okay?
Okay.
And here it is. Okay? And so this is where we've said, remember that most of the time we've always had basically 77, 78 pennies. So that's the total. And those pennies are these pennies up here that you see, the 10 pennies, the 8 pennies, going up closer to 12 pennies are within the 78 pennies. They're not on top. Now you heard me say on slide 1 that it's on top, that levy. But that's levy. That's not tax rate. Okay? And so we need to keep it right around this level, or otherwise our mix of revenue between operating and capital, dealing with 77 pennies, dealing with the simultaneous growth quotient of 6% and AV, we've got to stay within this realm. If we start going up to 20 cents, then at some point in time, operations become a factor. So the way we look at it is we manage it on the debt rate.
Okay, Greg, what is the optimum debt service to our revenues that we should have?
I'd have to calculate it. I don't have that off the top of my head, and I don't look at it that way because, you know, in my world of public finance, if it's a revenue bond, you're concerned about coverage. If it's a GO bond, then you're really dealing with the 78 pennies.
What was the price of a fire truck 5 years ago?
Half of what it is today.
Okay, what will the price of a fire truck be in 10 years from now?
Twice as much as it is today.
Perfect, right. Okay, so with that being said, what's the 10-year treasury today?
I didn't check it.
Okay, let's say it's around 1.6. What was it 5 months ago?
Less.
Right, probably half, right?
Right.
What if the 10-year treasury is at 4%?
Okay.
And we continue buying fire trucks and at some point, and this is where I'm going with this, our optimum debt service level, let's say right now it's at, let's say it's 350% of our revenues, okay? Or our debt level is 350% of our revenues. Let's 200%. I'm just for argument's sake.
Okay, and
Hypothetical.
are we using GO, or are we using
I'm just talking
TIF?
about everything that we're bringing in as a city
Okay,
versus
TIF included and everything
everything.
like that, okay?
Take it all. And let's say we're at 200%. And let's say, we're growing, that's great. And then 10 years from now, we have all this infrastructure in place. And we have to replace things out at Grand Park, or Grand Junction needs a tune-up, and we need new fire trucks, and we need new police cars, and we need new things for Board of Public Works, et cetera. And let's just say for argument's sake, the 10-year treasury's at 5%.
Okay,
And financing becomes more expensive. And now all of a sudden, we aren't growing anymore. Let's just say, just hypothetically.
I'm on your hypothetical,
Okay.
yes. I'm down your road of hypothetical.
Okay.
Yep.
Where are we at?
We're on a hypothetical road that will have to take a left turn or a right turn off because we will not probably be there. And I would hope, number one, we would guide ourselves down that hypothetical better than you set it up. And number two, I think at that point in time, we would have to look at the facts at that point in time, and you're probably taking an off-ramp. Which means, we've been saying for times as we go, we're trying to put some pay-as-you-go into place. Matter of fact, we got a recommendation to do that, made that recommendation last year to use CCD, start using some cash as we go. So I think under your hypothetical, we would structure a very good left turn or right turn off of your road.
Even if interest rates stay the same, and everything, and costs keep rising, right? We're already seeing prices escalate from an inflationary standpoint.
Oh, yeah, my true market basket is
Way
going
up.
up a lot.
Way up.
Yeah.
Polyethylenes are up 32%. Packaging, McCormick's just put out a big notice the other day that they're gonna raise prices on every product that goes into the grocery. I mean, we're gonna see it across the board. We spent, as a country, and I'm not saying this has to do with the city, but we've spent, with our COVID bailouts, $43,000 per individual in the United States. That's what we've spent, $5.9 trillion. So let's just say the 10-year treasury stays the same, but prices still increase. I want to know what our optimum debt level is per revenues, because at some point, interest rates are going to change.
Yes.
I don't know when. Nobody knows when, but they're going to change. And when I look at the GO bonds, and this is getting us back to that same conversation we had last year. We are looking at and with all due respect, you say it like it's a great thing that we're going to keep the tax rate high and we're going to keep everything keep going. I look at that and say, wow, why wouldn't I want to level that thing off?
But I don't think you heard me. First of all, I didn't say hi. Those are your words.
Yeah.
And second of all, I think for the foreseeable future, we're talking about a community that has a lot of needs, and we're trying to maintain the tax rate. I did not say it wouldn't go down. At some point in time, maybe I ask the question every time, do we really need to do the GEO even before we get to you? Do we need to plan these, and do we need, and we work very hard with Jeremy and Todd making sure what capital items are going to be included. And again, I think we told you last year, and we're telling you even in this presentation, we're trying to look at ways to do pay-as-you-go, cash funding as we go, but we got to be very strategic about it. So so all I'm asking is, what is your ask? And we'll produce what you asked for.
Yeah.
Okay? But I don't know the question at this point.
Okay, well, my initial question was, what's the optimum debt level for the
We will
city?
look at that.
Perfect.
So as he retreats to synthesize that, I think we've said the same thing last year in different ways.
Yeah,
The administration, as the administration representative, agree that the GEO bond strategy is a strategy, not the strategy. And we employed that, again, using the increased AV. And I'll restate what I said last year. When we see that is no longer supporting or is sustainable, you back away. But I think we aren't going to decide this tonight, but it's to reestablish the conversation. There are some recommendations in this slide deck. How do we step away from the GEO bond strategy? We're not wedded to it. It's just a tool. And then also meet the needs. So I'll try to stay on task here is you can see what this represents, that these, as they fall off, and as Greg mentioned earlier, of the 77 ... but let's call it 78 cents a hundred, there's a dime in that tax rate stack that supports these things here. So as we move along, total annual property tax debt payments. I won't go color by color or line by line. You'll be able to read that on your own and certainly ask questions. As you can see, this is a forecast. This is what we've modeled in here for the public safety renovation, converting it to the police department. You also see this, we'll have this relabeled to new fire station headquarters. So you can see how that lays in there. And yes. Now, this is kind of small font, but this is from your sustainability plan, debt service requirements, current proposed tax bonds. Again, we're right here. This has not been issued. I will have a timeline for you to consider as we move through the summer on the proposed fire station project out on Osborne Trails real estate. You'll be able to read this at your leisure. But again, it's a look back and a look forward on debt issuance. Here, representing tax increment financing. So, and we'll label these up better for you, but you see the event center, you see this revenue bond, and I think it's 2012 B, Series B. And yes, we'll label those up so they're a little bit more intuitive and self-described. But these are also what we have forecasted in here. As you're aware of the Union Square parking garage, Wheeler Landing project, and the J.C. Hart property, the apartment project. All these are in tax increment. If you'll recall, these are in suballocated areas, and these two are developer backed. And this is going to be, as we proposed to you already, this is the Union Square is lit back as a credit enhancement. Again, these are all funded and serviced out of the increment they create out of their project. So it's not laying across the rooftops throughout the city, the 1%. These are the Tiff Bonds. Again, we'll label these up for you, so a little bit more self-described, and how those are allocated using tax increment financing, and with some assumptions there. TIF revenue is forecasted as a look back and a look forward out of each of these particular TIFs.
You don't have forecasted revenues for the three on here? Or you do? I see Grand Junction, but I don't see Wheeler Rock.
Correct,
Town.
correct. Yeah, you have those assumptions in those developer agreements, what they need to produce in order to cover the debt, but they're not represented on this particular slide. So here it is on one particular sheet. So inclusive of stormwater, which are revenue bonds, so those are serviced out of the stormwater fees that are paid. This is, I believe, yeah, it's gone. So this was, for those of you who may not know, this is the bridge over 156th Street. It's part of the NDOT project that we had to pay.
This is from the AFR, the annual financial report, so this is on the DLGF website.
Okay. This, it's represented in an earlier slide, Main Street, that is 186th Street, so we collected the increment from what is now Wellbrook to pay for the road that was built out there, 186th Street, back to that. You can see turf lease, and you'll see that again here in just a second. And then, of course, the geo bonds as we've described already. So this is part of Grand Park. This is a turf lease for all the, I'm sorry. This is the turf lease that has been covered out of CCD. This goes back to, yes, 2013 for the synthetic surfaces. It is our Mr. Garataz, and we certainly agree to fund this and retire it, pay it off, and then unlock CCD for, quite frankly, a strategy to get away from the geo bond. Cum cap development, pay for those fire apparatus, lease, fleet purchases, et cetera, et cetera. That is that. When we talk about 78 cents, 10 cents is debt with geo bond, but 5 cents is also CCD that we come before you annually, I think summer, reestablish it up to a nickel. That's your local authority, but oftentimes it's dialed down by the DLGF. Sometimes it's 4 cents. And so it's part of the overall 78 cents a 100.
We talked about that last year, right?
We did.
Yeah, and it actually gets automatically dialed down by statute every year. So we recommend to our fast-growing communities, you keep it at a nickel because it could go down from 0.05 to 0.045, 4.5 cents in 1 year. And you not only lose that then in the following year on your current AV, but that difference, that 1.5 penny, but also on all your new AV that you bring in. So it's in this community, it's a valuable nickel to keep at a nickel.
So you've seen this in a different format. This is Jeremy's, what I would call his battle rhythm for capital projects. There's no other department, save public safety, for operational needs and, the every decade plus building project. There's no other division of the city that has more capital needs than the Public Works Department. And you've seen this in a different variation in a spreadsheet. I think it's been circulated, but kind of condense it and keep it in line with this particular conversation as we move forward into our planning, not only for 2022, but beyond these projects. And so what you see here is the project cost estimated or actual. It's different funding sources, okay? So MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organization, or as it's often referred to as federal highway. So money comes from the feds into an MPO. We are in the Indianapolis MPO, Kokomo has an MPO, Fort Wayne has an MPO. We make application for projects, have to explain why it's a competitive award process, and then we have to adhere to federal highway standards and all their criteria, and those monies are administered, then transferred, it's probably an improper term, but administered by way of NDOT. So,
Todd, excuse me, did you mention that traditionally it's been 80-20, and effective this year, the share will be 90-10?
I did not know that, but now I do. So we've been very successful in that particular form, and I think noted earlier, and I know we're going to have a discussion, more focused discussion here in the next few days with Mr. Johns, Council President. That money, I think you mentioned publicly the federal funding. The federal funding was assumed by state funding. So it's funded by the state, which quite frankly is not a bad thing because of the expensive bureaucratic things we have to go through on federal highway, like environmental and archaeological, just certain things we have to do under Land Act. So the money moved from one column to another as a funding source. So this 7.5 was over here, and the state took it and moved it over here. So that just gives you a one-pager of projects, year anticipated, cost, funding source, and we're back to here once again. How do we do this, right? And so we're not going to answer that question tonight, but we certainly have it forecasted, and we will work with you and specifically Council Finance. What better solutions might there be for these particular funding mechanisms?
And Todd, I think the important thing, we kind of had it when we did our GO last year, but Jeremy and I, John, we had a conference call on this about 3 weeks ago, and these numbers change columns and numbers like that too. They do. Jeremy's got a lot of projects to keep moving, keep the funding funding in the right columns, in the right projects in the right columns, and they're very fluid. They do change. And we try and find the best place for them. So I think that's very important, because someone will take one table and they might have another table in a month from now. They change for good reasons, okay? But staying on top of it takes Jeremy and his department a lot of work.
So one important thing I would point out to you in this sheet is obviously the anticipated or estimated cost. That this column here, road impact fees, easy for me to say, park impact fees, local roads and streets. This is a state revenue, what I would call mechanism, local roads and street. We have no control over that. We don't regulate that. We don't adjust that. Is non-property tax. This column here is non-property tax right here. So you can see road impact fees are exactly that, conceived in the statute to be a property tax offset, take the burden off of the general public, the general taxpayer, and put that burden upon the people who are actually impacting the roads.
Is local road and
No, no, so we can, as you see here, we've commingled it. So road impact fee, you're the developer, there's a manual about that thick. You get assessed a per trip charge. It has to be defensible in court because they do get challenged. So you by statute can pay over a period of 5 years. We set an interest rate on that. You install that or pay it in lump sum, apartment complex, strip mall. We bring that money in. So what we do enter into is road impact fee agreement. So if you're the developer and let's say it's a $500,000, well, we'll give you credit if you make the improvements to that road pursuant to our thoroughfare plan.
Like what we did over at the concrete place.
Exactly, yeah. So this is a property tax offset, so again, what I would call the 1% club. The burden is not borne by the homeowner, but the homeowner or the private resident property taxpayer benefits from this. So that's a law, park impact fees, same way. This is, commercial pays this, as does residential. Commercial does not pay the park impact fees, and this, again, is set by a funding formula by the state. So you can see, of all this, let's call it 50 million, this is federal money, this is non-property tax money, this is state money. Over here, we could sum all this up, would, in the form of a GO bond, would be on the 1% club, if you will. Really 1, 2, and 3.
Todd, and I think it's very important if someone's listening, I assume that this is being broadcasted, from someone listening at home, important thing is this, when we talk about some growth, and if you talk about some of your neighbors, I beg to offer, if you surveyed about 20 people, neighboring people, they don't have these. In Westfield, we have these in place. Park impact fee, the road impact fee, very, very important to keep to again, manage the 77 cents, provide the assets at no cost to the White House across the street here. Okay, very important. To new houses coming in, probably is added to it, but not the current pre-existing White House I'm looking at across the street.
But Todd, what you said was the 1%ers use it and the 3%ers pay for it. And that's the balance that a council has to walk to make sure that we don't load up the 1%ers too much. And we have to strive to get the 3% stuff.
Absolutely, and I want to be very clear, and I want to make sure that I don't speak too fast and with too much ambiguity. 1%ers, let's say it's a housing development, they're in charge of road impact fee as well, but it's a much lower per trip charge than what it would be if it's a commercial dwelling. So the road impact fees are largely coming from commercial users. Park impact fees are coming from 1% and 2% users, if I call it that, the multifamily and single families.
But our danger in that would be if, let's say, the 1%ers are not keeping up with their share of operational costs. If we have vast inflation, which I hope we don't, but if everybody's getting $2,800, we could have it. But we're walking a tightrope, is really what we're doing,
Yeah, welcome to Todd and I's world. We're doing that almost every day on this. So, but the other thing is, the important point, be careful there. I just wanted to say the 1%ers, depending on the level of 1%ers, because the value in today's world is not necessarily the home, but it is sometimes what they're contributing to capital and what the income is. And the LIT on the 1%ers, you choose your level, it's expressed in the sustainability, those 1%ers can be enormously valuable.
Can I ask one more question, kind of on Joe's thing? So, so recently, a developer who's going to possibly come to the council and ask for something said that, they were going to ask for, 190, 80, 70, stair step abatement, right? Yeah. And so, I said, well, one of the issues is that, we don't collect any money, and then, So I said, why not do 60% for 5 years and 40% for 5 years, right? So we're even those things out. That would help us, wouldn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, because they were amenable to it as long as those property taxes stayed relatively the same.
I think that on abatements, the typical ask is 10% graduated over 10 years. We have, on those commercial dwellings, pushed back and said, all right, 5 years. You have 5-year burn off. And I think Councilor Edwards used the right word. It's a balancing act. So today, if it's a undeveloped ag land and it
Right.
throws off, let's just pull a number, $10, and under an abated schedule, even on the full 10 years, if it throws off in its second year, because the first year is 0, and it throws off $20, that's still advantageous to us. It's just cash flow. So how do we want to accelerate the cash flow off of that parcel?
Yeah.
And I think I enjoy negotiating these development agreements, and I think it's always worthwhile to go back and say, well, could you consider this? Because it's not just a slam dunk, and we've had developers come in here and stand in this podium and wave around what other communities are doing, and I frankly don't really care what
Well,
other
that's
communities are doing.
That's what I asked him, and he said, as long as, he said it's just a little outside the box. He said most developers do the 100% abatement
Yeah.
up front. But he said he wouldn't be opposed to it as long as the property taxes are the same. And I would think that would benefit the city because we'd get money up front.
Yeah, how do you accelerate the cash flow going in, coming into us? And again, I think I know Councilor Johns and I spoke about this as Paul, Jarrett, and Gilbert, and I think you and I spoke about this, Councilor Patton, is there's a 40-acre plot, it's kind of an infill. They were looking for some sort of reimbursement help. Could it be that parcel is more valuable to us under those conditions because it's zoned, it's enclosed industrial? So could we look at that? I'm just using it as an example. Yes, if it's a farm field today or undeveloped field, what does it throw off at 2% ag abated? Because there's a cap on ag land now, doesn't do us really any good. Then converting that to a commercial taxpayer 3% abated and compress that abatement period, yeah, I think it's worth having those conversations over and over again.
Okay.
And I think it's worth even calculating, and if you know, we kind of do that in the fiscal plan, because what we're seeing is the need for services. So I like that, believe it or not, maybe on this one we're agreeing. So, because in year 1 and 2, you are incurring, there's police, there's fires, there's things that have to happen. And so, I like to get as much, some money up front.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Any questions on this deck?
Yeah,
right
I
here?
have one question. So, just your thoughts on this or some clarification. So, as I look at these projects, sometimes we're paying with GeoBond, sometimes we're paying with TIF. Sometimes TIF money is going to, like the RDC for projects. In terms of our knowledge about the overall picture of pie on TIF, like that would be helpful. So we've struggled to come to consensus on GeoBond strategy.
Yeah.
But like that's a critical piece, like what TIF money is available to pay down a project.
Yep.
What TIF money do we need to use though to build future amenity projects, which
Yep.
we think are important, like a Grand
Yep.
Junction, so forth and so on. But I think that sometimes coupling that information is just useful in the GeoBond strategy talk and the TIF talk, because I think sometimes when it's not put all together, assumptions are made, if
Agreed.
that makes sense. So just my 2 cents on that.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's important to note, I've said this publicly throughout my career in this role, TIF, while is often abused and misunderstood and across the fruited plain, from an operational standpoint, TIFing and locking up every single dollar in a TIF district does us no good on the operational side. Because we can use tax increment financing inside of an economic development area to build that road and pay for that road. But I can't go to the RDC and say, I need X amount of dollars to go repave that road, paint the curbs, and plow the street. I can't go to the RDC and say, I need X amount of dollars to drag over to the operational side to enforce the law or fight the fires. So it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy of very poor outcome to say, okay, we're gonna lock up every dollar in TIF. Because it never flows over to the operational side. It never flows over to buy a fire truck, to do whatever, to support salaries. So you're exactly right, Councilor Gilbert, and we have that, it's not in this deck. What are those TIF obligations? As you know, the largest chunk of TIF obligations is that of Grand Park. And it's that critical tipping point of 2023 of when there's enough increment inside of that district to service that debt. And the forecast, at least the hope is, and so this is kind of the, in all candor, this is kind of the box that I find myself in oftentimes is, all right, if Wheeler's a public project, as we know, it's public documents. They want to develop that farmland. It's not doing us it's not paying any bills undeveloped, but how do you spur that development of $7.3 million or almost $8 million for infrastructure? So to put a partnership together to accelerate that so it is developable, so then that increment that they create, we aren't going to create it, they create, then flows through that TIF district and to the overlapping taxing units. That's the art of all this as we move forward and say, okay, an SEP is an example. So I'm going to talk about projects that are already been approved. It's a 75-25 split, right? It's 25%, as you heard the county's lawyer, 25% of the AV that goes and flows through the rest of the overlapping tax units. So that being said, point well taken, and we'll try to maybe condense that as a side-by-side. That will help as we move forward. All right, great. Fund report as of December 31st, 2020. Now this is all in, okay? So we inserted this for your review as where the book's closed. It does have, it does show the various TIF districts. And as you look through this after tonight, have questions, please do not hesitate to reach out, and we'll give you clarity on that.
And important point, if you see a GO bond with a balance, I think we addressed that, Todd,
Yep.
last year. We're trying to work with Jeremy and/or if it's a piece of equipment and make sure we don't have GO bond proceeds laying around. And technically, we try and stay by the, trying to spend within 3 years. So.
I won't go through all this. This is kind of mind-numbing. But it has all the fund reports, including payroll and trash. And of course, the clerk treasurer's office will be able to bring clarity to that as well. So ending the year of approximately $13.4 million. And it's always worth noting, I believe that this community in its history was a deficit spend. We borrowed money to pay the bills, did not have an operating cash balance. And for the last, 10 years or better, we've had an operating cash balance, so we didn't have to go have a line of credit to even make payroll. So through the efforts of our directors, and we are starting, as of I think a few weeks ago, we're piloting OpenGov to be our now budget planning platform. It was SharePoint, kind of clunky, so OpenGov, so it's all there. So the fund reports, the actuals versus budgeted, it's a one snapshot for you all and for the public. So we're going to input that in, and we begin to do some beta testing with that just a few weeks ago.
And Todd, I think an important point on that is we told council that we'd get revenues built in this year, and we did work with the clerk treasurer's office, and we did get the projections for revenues, so they should also be showing up. So we committed to you last year, we'd show you both parts of the equation, and that should be done. We've worked pretty well with the clerk treasurer's office. It's worked out good.
Hey, Todd, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
So the previous slide, you had 13.428 million. How much of that is obligated?
So if you, I won't scroll to the back to the top, but you'll see there's over $57 million in restricted funds. That's either borrowed proceeds, stormwater, payroll, things of that nature. So this is a cash liquidity. So when we drop to this slide and say, well, how do we deal with some of these expenses? It is Mr. Garataz's recommendation, and I will let him speak to his work product and recommendations as to how to best use that cash, a portion of that cash.
So first one, you've already heard, and we're gonna, we're gonna seek approval of that.
Laser pointer?
Yeah, they're pretty much in line, so, but, number one, is the payoff of the turf lease, and we'd like to get that underway so that before we set the 2022 budget, we can talk about what we're putting in there, in there for, the actual budget of the CCD. Pay-as-you-go equipment as much as possible using CCD, while again, trying to, we want to keep that at a nickel. A nickel is still part of the 77 cents. You know, with the capital projects fund, when you had that, that was really important to keep that at that level that was authorized by the state. Utilize cash for the portion of capital needs. That's a really sensitive one that we're carefully trying to put together and trying to look at after we put together the next version of the sustainability. But it's very, very important with the bottom bullet point, which is we're at this point in time we're recommending the city request a confidential S&P rating. And we just did that with Shelby County. It turned out it's a very awesome process. But what we do on every one of those bullets up above will impact exactly what happens on that bottom bullet.
What is a confidential Standard & Poor's rating?
So if the mayor was Standard & Poor's and I was City of Westfield, I'd say, Mayor, we want to get a rating, and he would say, fine, show me all of your gory details. We go there, we talk it out, or we have a presentation. We actually had a 3-hour presentation on Zoom going through absolutely everything. And basically at that point in time, they go back and rate the community. At that point in time, basically the S&P mayor and I would know the rating. At that point in time, we could determine if we want to formally release it or not. We might talk about the reasons on what's wrong, what's not wrong, how could we improve it. We might love it, like we did in Shelby County, and actually the very next day we released it. And so, but it's a way to not just get an indicator, but get an actual rating. And S&P is actually awesome to work with. I've done presentations in New York City with many, many communities right downtown.
If it was good, you'd want the world to know.
Correct, and it's your definition of good. Remember, that scale on S&P, you got a double, you got your AAA, you got your AA plus, you got your, you go through all those. Some, if it's just slightly above investment grade, I'm not sure I'd like it. But yeah, if it's something you believe in and you believe it's where you should be, then you would release it. If not, you'd go back and do your homework.
A good rating allows you to borrow money.
Pardon me?
A good rating would allow you to borrow money more cheaply, should.
Correct. It's actually even, we get a lot of our clients get a call as soon as but from their health insurance providers, from their property insurance provider. It really gives you a benchmark for the community. So it's actually used in a lot of ways. And, I just recently got Hancock County a AAA rating from Fitch. The only other county is actually Marion County. And that's it, it takes a lot of work and a lot of effort, and there's a lot of homework that has to be done before you do that. What I'm saying is that what you have to be very, very careful with is when you do that, that you've got all of your other ducks in a row. And by the way, this is not only, we've heard this from some people looking at maybe bidding on some of your other bonds and or taking out some of your current bonds. And they said, if you had a rating, maybe it's a fact of life now with the world. They want to peg a benchmark, peg you in and they don't want to assume, they want to know.
Yeah, that's what we ought to do.
Well, we're being very careful about it. We want to really look at it, but it takes a team of this room, okay? And what you want to achieve and what the whole group wants to achieve, or quite frankly, if we're not if we're battling on certain things, we should get those battles done first. It's kind of like your mom used to say, don't iron your dirty laundry out in public. We don't want to do that. You want to have a team effort, a group approach, and that gets the best results. Okay? And so we're gonna carefully look at how we do that and what we do, and we're gonna make some recommendations as we go forward in 2021 here. And we just labeled that the PSB lease, keeping in mind what we were trying to do is those pennies we talked to you about last year that were rolling off, we were going to try and roll those on so that we could fund the new fire station. In that case, dollar for dollar. And trying to keep the amortization similar. The cash that we have, there is absolutely no doubt that helps us buffer, okay, changes or losses. If we don't make that bonus round of 6% add to the levy, like we said last year, we were starting to put some damage control, Scotty, in place, okay? And we were going to see some scheduled drawdown of cash balances. So, we got to keep that and be careful because it can turn on you on a dime. We really want to see where we get past the August and September lit taxes and the certification there and kind of what happens on a couple other things as we go. So this is, and then the TIF, I'm not personally responsible for the TIF. You have another consultant that does that, but this is, we kind of jointly work as a team on the overall, financial position of Westfield, and there's some of the TIF recommendations that we've made too. But we've got to be careful because we can't have TIF consume all of the AV because we got to have that good AV for operating. So that's kind of to summarize those recommendations, and we're going to kind of hopefully work as a team on all of these and move in the right direction. That's the positive note I'm going to stop on.
So I got one question to ask, and I know this is early, but with the, whether you like it or not, we've got money coming from the federal government for this COVID relief bill. Was it $9.6 million for Westfield?
That's
So
correct.
have we thought about, I know it's early, and we don't really know all the restrictions around that, but how is that going to impact the strategy? Are you guys going to implement that into the strategy, or is that just going to be, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, or?
Actually, the mayor already talked to me about that before the meeting here, and so, yes, we're really, I told him some of the things that we're doing in other places. Matter of fact, again, I do a lot of counties, and 33 million we're going to get in Hancock County or Hendricks County. And so we got to watch the P's and the Q's in that bill, and that's what the mayor and I was talking about earlier. And I think we can be very strategic and be very careful, because I guess the way I look at it, the hypothetical kind of set it up, probably will never get that again, okay? And we probably will pay for it in the future. So we got to be careful, just don't want to squander it. And not that we would, not the mayor would recommend that, but we've been chit-chatting about that, yes.
Yeah, to further that, Councilor Willis, I think you're right. There's not been a lot of direction come out with that. They've made the announcement of what nearly every city or town or unit of government across the country gets. There is some preliminary direction on that, but as the mayor and I talked, this is a topic ripe for the council finance committee. What do you do with $9.6 million you had anticipated within the parameters set forth by the federal government? And it's not dissimilar from when there was a lit settle up from the state. They held all the units of government that had a lit, they held that cash because they found themselves upside down at one point in history, and they released it, but you could only use it for certain things. They prescribed how you legislated, and I say you as a council, your predecessors, you made the local decision, but then they told you how to spend it. So who knows what happens with that, and we'll know more, and as we receive information, we'll certainly communicate that. I did have email communication with the clerk, and she's gonna, I'm sure, receive direction on how to receipt that in, how to account for it, because it will be audited. You rest assured that they'll be examined.
And actually, Todd, in the bill, which I have actually read the part, it's even saying you may have to make a periodic report to the Secretary of Treasury. So it may actually, it's in theory, or the reality at this point, it'll come in 2 installments, one in March, one later in the year. So Mayor and I were talking about it's kind of an IOU for the future. But periodic reports directly to the Treasurer of the United States, that'll be interesting and could set it up for future federal audits.
And I've heard that we can't use that money to service any debt. Is that correct? It's got to be a new spend?
I've not heard it that you can use it for current existing debt. No, I haven't seen that in there. So, nor that twist.
Okay.
Some of the direction we've seen preliminarily is industry is impacted by COVID, restaurants, tourism, rental assistance, which you had the trustee in your podium a few weeks ago. They're administering that. Hamilton County is receiving $65 million of those monies. $65 million.
What are they gonna do with it?
So, I'm not gonna respond. This kind of, I just would like for tonight to have been kind of the starting point as we lean into not only 2022, but certainly the out years. There's a whole host of other underlying data sets, but this is, albeit in 22 slides, is compressed and condensed over the hour and 15 minutes we've been together. Going from here, we will, in earnest, in April, start to really crank up the operational budget side. And I don't anticipate too many surprises with that. What those asks will be are already represented in the sustainability plan, firefighters, police officers. So no major operational impacts that I can foresee now. Health insurance is always kind of a wily element, and as you may recall, 2020 was our first year to go self-funded. That was an incredibly timely decision because renewal rates for 2021 for the fully insured clients, our representative is First Person Advisors, a really strong group. Their fully insured client base saw 20 to 22%. We saw just a tick over 10%. And we ended last year with about $400,000 left in that fund carried over to this year. And so and I won't bore you with as much energy as I've put into the insurance dynamic of our workforce, but it was always to try to achieve as much predictability as we possibly can. And I think certainly in the early phases of our self-funded program, that has been achieved. So operationally, as we move through in the 2022 component, I just don't see, I've been doing this a while now, any large shifts of expense. It's more on the capital side and how do we fund those other capital purchases, fire trucks, police cars, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I think Mr. Garretaz is hovering here again, so I'll get out of his way, then I'm gonna shut him off, so.
Well, I think the important point is where we started, Todd, back here very, very early on, when we said the intricacies of the financial strategy. It's not, it doesn't come down to one person, it comes down to a team effort of the mayor's office, and Todd and John and all of us kind of working together, the legislation that we've been able to fend off, keep from stealing or taking dollars away from the good citizens of Westfield, and trying to maintain what that White House across the street is paying. And so, and yet provide good service and public safety and all that. So hopefully you see there's a lot of stuff that we do on the background before he pulls the cane out.
Mr. Garretaz, a question on the cash. So appreciate looking at all that. In terms of the size of the economy we are now, I mean, what's the recommendation for how much cash we need to keep on hand?
Well, we're even, as we
Percentage of
go
revenue.
forward, I'm going to use just a second to answer your question. As we go forward, if we did go forward with the confidential ratings, we would actually put a cash balance target together by some of our major funds, because the number one thing they're going to look at is liquidity and the liquidity funds. The normal is a minimum of 25% of revenues, and so we have to keep it moving with the 25% as the revenues grow. And I just had one county say, well, it's 25% of 12 million. I said, your revenues are now 20 million. That was 2 or 3 years ago. So that 25% changes every year, and that's a minimum. They're in hard times, COVID times, people are saying you need 50% of your, especially when we were getting down to maybe losing lit, it could be as high as 50% of your operating budget. So the amount or the percentage that we try and peg it, there's a minimum, and then, an overall target we'll start addressing.
So I'm going to ask a question, if you don't mind. With that explanation, wouldn't it make sense to ensure that we're in that position, whether we're going for the
easy answer is yes.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
So moving forward, obviously you'll take time to study these documents. We'll get them out to you. Any questions you may have, I would just make a recommendation that I would like to use the Finance Committee to its fullest. You can't, beyond what we meet here once a month. So looking at those recommendations, decide among yourselves as the 3-person committee who that I won't call it daily point of contact, but have that communication back and forth, because you can't meet 2. We can certainly meet in 3, your full panel, but we public notice it. But there's a lot of input that you would take back to the committee, make a recommendation to the full council, then we get on a path. So that would be my recommendation as we start to really roll into this cadence moving forward.
Just a side thing, you mentioned the operational budget, right? And as we start that process, I just kind of wrote some notes down here, and from going through it last year to this year, and dare I say, I've seen how Carmel does theirs, and I'd like to actually do that same type of thing. So I kind of wrote, I just said, have each department head present from a bottoms-up approach their budget, and let us know what each line item consists of and represents. So, for instance, it could even be a list of employees in each department, their title, job responsibilities. Obviously, that'd be different. Board of Public Works, if you have like 10 laborers or something, that's, you wouldn't say, oh, well, labor A does this, whatever. But, so that'd be more generic. But, I watched Carmel's budget process last year, and I actually think I think we should do the exact same thing. we all sit here, the person comes up for their department, from a bottoms-up, that's the one thing they don't do, which I'd like to see, is a bottoms-up approach, saying, hey, this is what consists of our budget, this is our line items, and what's in each line item, and it makes us all smarter and exactly know, all 7 of us know exactly what's in that budget. What, if we think there's hard dollars, soft dollars, whatever, we can ask those questions, and then I just think it makes us all more knowledgeable.
Yeah, and there's no problem with that. I think what we'll bring together, because we have several different things, and this is what we do every day, is like, I think I've pointed to the salary study. That is our guidepost for compensation from just a salary perspective, before any positions are granted or created, because what I expect to do is maybe in June or July, come before you for adjustment to the salary ordinance, because things change throughout the course of a year, and you can't do anything until you approve it. But before those changes are made, department heads and the packet of information, we send that over to Archer, which is our salary consultant, run it through their calculus. So we have a defensible compensation for that particular skill set, that particular position within the organization. So it's not some arbitrary number that, oh, I like this guy better than I like that guy. And so it's much more scientific, and our directors are within that. So we can certainly do that. I think it'd be a worthwhile exercise. It'd be good for many of our department heads to present publicly.
I'm not saying you have to go through Archer, because.
Right, I'm just saying that is one of the elements that we use
Yeah.
in the personnel.
Okay, I was just saying, because if you have that benchmark, truthfully, you can go to the BLS website and pull up all that data. You can, to the regional specific, state specific, it'll tell you exactly what people should make.
Yeah, so, but yeah, we can run through their organizational charts, just so you all have an awareness of, there's 220 people that provide the services of this
Right.
city, and it's,
Well, that's what I'm saying, like, the Board of Public Works, I wouldn't expect Jeremy to say, truck driver A, or this guy's doing, I'm saying, but maybe some of the other departments, maybe they do.
yeah, point well taken, because we often take things for granted how the system even works here, this organization, functions. And I've had the privilege and honor of working here for across 25 years, just about 2 weeks ago. Yes, I started working here when I was 10. That being said, each department is interdependent of each other. And it's really a fascinating thing that Kevin's department is, I've often referred to as the front door. What gets approved through his department manifests and puts demands on public safety. And what you approve, the APC, and what you ultimately approve impacts those things, impacts these things. And so it's no component of this city city operations lives in its own vacuum.
And Todd, I want to make sure too, as we go through the budget process, we also involve you in the revenue side. If you remember, I was trying to involve you in that last year. We got the revenues in there for the budget now. We got budget actual on revenues. And so that's a critical piece too, because then you know why we sometimes say no or yes to certain operating expenses. And so, because it's also driven by the revenue, and the department heads, in some departments, are very critical to the revenue projections, so.
So with that, any final questions? What I would anticipate is we really start to crank this up in May at putting the 2022 budget together, and I'll work with Councilor Patton as chair of the Finance Committee, and we'll work on a cadence and how the Finance Committee wants to handle that and integrate with our conversations. A lot of it is handled electronically now. So used to, we'd go into a room and just beat each other up for 2 or 3 days, and now it's just inputted. So we've got a decent process. We're, again, changing the platform to OpenGov, so it's all interfaced. So those quarterly budget versus actual, we'll get those developed. And so it's just a click of the button rather than spreadsheets and getting lost in translation. So with that, any last questions?
This is Cindy. Sorry, Amber. Bit of an echo. Thank you for the presentation, guys. One thing that I'm kind of wishing we would have gotten a chance to discuss, and maybe we will in the future, is some of the things that weren't on the capital improvement project in the very near future there. Things like 191st Street and how we're going to tackle that. The expenses for the operations for Grand Junction Plaza, which I think are probably going to be sizable. Just a lot of those things that, of course, are more granular, but I'm hoping we get a chance to really delve into that so we can plan for the future.
Oh, for sure. I think these are, as you know, 191st Street is, I think, anticipated 14 million-ish.
Yeah, the whole thing. So one of the pieces, the piece from 31 to Tomlinson is in that. As you move west from Tomlinson to Horton, that one is, gosh. Yeah, 14 in total is a pretty good number.
So noted, Counselor Spalger. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, I yield. Adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've had worse stuff from COVID.